This video is the second part of a three-part series on the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. It will discuss what made ancient Greece healthy, strong, and beautiful, according to Nietzsche. If you haven't already watched part 1, I suggest you click on this link. When Nietzsche describes Greek culture as the healthiest ever seen on Earth, he is not talking about the Greece that Socrates inhabited. Instead, he is referring to Homeric Greece. Homeric life was poor in philosophy, but rich in action. It was too young, strong, and healthy to bother with abstract thought. There was no formal education during this time, no teaching of letters, no spelling, no grammar, no books. Like the Romans, who came after them, they looked down upon literary culture as effeminate degeneration. Children were not taught to read or write. The girl was taught the arts of the home, the boy those of the chase and war. He learned to fish and swim, set snares, handle animals, aim the arrow and the lance, and take care of himself in all the emergencies of a lawless life. And lawless it was. During this time, piracy was still a respected occupation. Indeed, says Thucydides, this came to be the main source of livelihood among the early Hellenes, no disgrace being yet attached to such an occupation. The early Greeks valued pillage and piracy and had nothing but contempt for the man who tills the soil. To quote Nietzsche's mentor, Jacob Burckhardt, tilling the soil, crafts, shopkeeping, commerce, and the like was despised. The only occupation fit for a nobleman was the practice of arms or work for the games or the state, not work concerned with the necessities of life. The supreme virtue for the Homeric Greek is a brave and ruthless intelligence. Virtue is literally virtus, manliness, arete, the quality of Aries or Mars. The good man is not one that is gentle and forbearing, faithful and sober, industrious and honest. He is simply one who fights bravely and well. A bad man is not one that drinks too much, lies, murders and betrays. He is one that is cowardly, stupid or weak. This conception of virtue is reflected in Greek religion. The Homeric gods were the gods of a conquering aristocracy. As Gilbert Murray says, the gods of most nations claim to have created the world. The Olympians make no such claim. The most they ever did was to conquer it. And when they have conquered their kingdoms, what do? Do they attend to the government? Do they promote agriculture? Do they practice trades and industries? Not a bit of it. Why should they do any honest work? They find it easier to live on the revenues and blast with thunderbolts the people who do not pay. They are conquering chieftains, royal buccaneers. They fight and feast and play and make music. They drink deep and roar with laughter at the lame smith who waits on them. Inspired by the example set by their gods, the Greeks took to the seas. During the Archaic period, they spread into every isle of the Aegean, into Crete, Rhodes, and Cyprus, into Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Asia Minor, into the Black Sea, into the shores and peninsulas of the North Aegean, into Italy, Gaul, Spain, Sicily, and Northern Africa. Like the Olympians that they worshipped, they conquered these places. In many instances, they reduced the prior inhabitants to slavery. In all these regions, they built city-states, independent and diverse, and yet Greek. They spoke the Greek tongue, worshipped Greek gods, read and wrote Greek literature, contributed to Greek science and philosophy, and participated in Greek athletic contests. These athletic contests are worth discussing in greater detail, for we can learn a great deal about the Greeks by studying their games. More precisely, we can learn about 1. The Greek love of contest, and 2. The Greek obsession with physical beauty and bodily strength. Athletics were at the centre of Greek life. Indeed, the Olympic Games were so important that not even the Persian invasion stopped them. While a handful of Greeks withstood Xerxes' army at Thermopylae, thousands of Greeks watched athletes compete in the Olympic Games. Upon hearing this, a Persian said to his general, "Good heavens, what manner of men are these against whom you have brought us to fight? Men who contend with one another, not for money, but for honour." This quote is probably better attributed to its author, Herodotus, than a Persian. Nevertheless, it reveals much about the Greek character. Indeed, the Greeks loved contests. Contest and the desire to be supreme lay at the centre of early Greek attitudes towards the world. the Greek word for contest was agon, and the agonistic spirit was at the center of Greek culture. To quote Camille Paglia, the Greeks defined existence as a struggle or contest, agon, that tested and built character. To strive to be the best was a moral duty. Life was a perpetual game or race, with little hope of rest. Nietzsche, too, sees the agon as a foundational characteristic of Greek culture. He believes that the ancient Hellenes' desire for struggle and strife was a sign of their health. The will to power, says Nietzsche, can manifest itself only against resistances. In other words, one's power can manifest itself only through struggle and strife. The Greeks, being a healthy people, constantly sought out competition in order to test and enhance their own strength. Whether it be on the battlefield or at the Olympic Games, the Greeks sought out resistances. Nietzsche believes this reveals an organic form of will to power among them. Over time, this spirit of competition would encompass Greek education, philosophy, religion, art, music, and drama. The Greeks would hold contests to determine the best poet, sculptor, and dramatist. But originally, the Greek agon was physical, centering around running, wrestling, boxing, and chariot racing. These games helped the Greeks prepare for war. But military efficiency was not the only aim of these games. Indeed, athletic contest helped the Greeks attain physical beauty and bodily strength. Those that won the contests had their bodies immortalized in stone, bronze, and wood. Statues of victorious athletes could be seen throughout the Greek city-state. Indeed, Greek art begins in the late 7th century BC with the archaic kouros, a more than life-size nude statue of a victorious athlete. For 300 years, Greek art centered around the muscular body of the victorious athlete. Such statues could only appear with any regularity in a culture devoted to physical and athletic development. This naturally brings us to the Greek obsession with physical beauty and bodily prowess. The Greeks believed that physical beauty and virtue were inseparable. The term that aristocrats used to describe themselves was kallokargathia, the beautiful and the good. The quality of kallokargathia was considered an attribute of the Greek elite. The Greeks believed that an aristocrat could be identified by their beauty, whilst the slave and sinner could be identified by their ugliness. The ideal of kallokargathia probably originated in the gymnasium, an aristocratic institution dedicated to the development of the body. The name comes from the ancient Greek term gymnos, meaning naked or nude. Greek men would exercise in the gymnasium nude. The Greek admiration for the human body and the willingness to display it were closely bound up with Greek ideas of honesty and godliness. The gymnasium promoted traditional aristocratic values, such as physical beauty, heroic excellence, and individual glory. In addition to promoting physical beauty, the gymnasium was also a place of leisurely discourse and academic instruction. It is certainly no coincidence that Plato's and Aristotle's philosophical schools were located near a gym. Only free men could train in the gymnasium. Slaves were forbidden. Athleticism was, therefore, an accurate marker of one's rank in society. Someone with an athletic body was likely to be an aristocrat, or at the very least a wealthy citizen. But men did not reach the ideal of kallokargathia simply by training in the gymnasium. Indeed, eugenics was practiced throughout the Greek world. The selective breeding of sporting and ornamental animals was one of the characteristic hobbies of Greek aristocrats. They knew that animals could be improved through selective breeding. This practice was eventually applied to humans as well as animals. In Sparta, newborn children were brought before a state council of inspectors. Any child that appeared ugly or defective was thrown from a cliff to die on the jagged rocks below. In Athens, law and public opinion allowed a father to kill a newborn child if it was weak or deformed. In both Athens and Sparta, Greeks had the habit of exposing their infants to extreme weather in order to harden them. Nietzsche believes the Greeks' willingness to embrace an intense training and breeding regimen over many generations made them a beautiful and hardy people. To quote a passage from Twilight of the Idols at length, "The beauty of a race, or a family, Their grace and graciousness in all gestures is won by work. Like genius, it is the end result of the accumulated work of generations. One must have made great sacrifices to good taste. One must have done much and omitted much for its sake. One must have preferred beauty to advantage, habit, opinion, and inertia. All that is good is inherited. Whatever is not inherited is imperfect, is a mere beginning. In Athens, the men and youths were far superior in beauty to the women, but what work and exertion in the service of beauty had the male sex there imposed on itself for centuries? In the paragraph just quoted, we find Nietzsche's sympathy for John Baptist Lamarck's theory of evolution. Lamarck believed that we inherited the character and strength of our forebears. This idea moves throughout Nietzsche's work. We find it expressed again and again. In Beyond Good and Evil, he writes, "One cannot erase from the soul of a human being what his ancestors liked to do most and did most constantly, whether they were modest and bourgeois in their desires, or whether they lived accustomed to commanding from dawn to dusk. It is simply not possible that a human being should not have the qualities and preferences of his parents and ancestors in his body." Nietzsche believed that the aristocratic embrace of a training and breeding regimen resulted in the physical beauty of the Greek aristocracy, but more importantly, it resulted in the cultural health, beauty, and strength of Greece. Nietzsche believes the organic pervades the realm of consciousness. All ideas, judgments, and the very pursuit of knowledge itself are rooted in the body and physiology. In other words, culture is inextricably linked with the body. To quote Nietzsche once again, culture should begin in the right place, not in the soul, as was the fateful superstition of the priests and the half-priests. The right place is the body, the gesture, the diet, physiology. The rest follows from that. Therefore, the Greeks remain the first cultural event in history. They knew, they did, what was needed. In short, Nietzsche believes that the ancient Greeks anticipated many of the scientific discoveries of the 19th century. They postulated a link between morality and aesthetics long before Cesar Lombroso had published The Criminal Man, and they were practicing eugenics long before Francis Galton had published Hereditary Genius. In other words, they had physical knowledge that the 19th century was only just beginning to rediscover, which is to say, knowledge of the body, of medicine, of diet, of breeding techniques, of athletic regimen and training techniques. This knowledge was the soil from which Greek culture had sprung, and for that reason, Nietzsche believed it was the healthiest the world had ever seen. Nietzsche hoped that the rediscovery of this knowledge in the 19th century by people like Lombroso and Galton would lead to another renaissance. To quote him one last time, "Oh, those Greeks, they knew how to live. What is needed for that is to stop bravely at the surface, the fold, the skin, to worship appearance, to believe in shapes, tones, words, in the whole Olympus of appearance. Those Greeks were superficial, out of profundity. And is not this precisely what we are coming back to? We daredevils of the spirit who have climbed the highest and most dangerous peak of current thought and looked around from up there, looked down from up there? Are we not just, in this respect, Greeks?" In the next part of this video series, we will discuss how Greece became sick and Nietzsche's conception of cultural sickness more broadly.